Going to prison is like dying with your eyes open. That's a quote from Bernard Carrick, someone who's been to the American prisons. So, I'm here to talk today about prison reform. What's wrong with our systems that we need to reform them, some viable alternatives, and what makes them a solution. And finally, what we can expect if if we implement these reforms, we as the larger society. So, my main point is that our current prison systems have held on to this being tough on crime sentiment for too long, that we are so harsh and so cruel on our prisoners that it causes them to detest the system that placed them there and not be unable to re-enter mainstream society. So let's go into detail exactly about what's wrong with our prison system. As many of you might be aware, America has the highest rate of incarceration of any country in the world. That includes every country on earth. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. That's a staggering discrepancy. But what you may not know is exactly how much we spend per year on our current system and how high our recidivism rate is compared to the rest of the world. And recidivism, the tendency of a person to re-enter prison after they've been released, is perhaps the best measure of a system's effectiveness, because most people would agree that the end goal of the prison system is to cause people to be able to re-enter society as productive members. But if they're being arrested, obviously they're not. So, first let's look at exactly how much we're spending on prison per year. And I've got a graph here. So you can see this is from 1980 to 2010. There's been a 350% increase over that 30-year period in constant dollars, that is taking inflation into account. And in 2010, we spent $80 billion on our prison system, which is a huge portion of the federal budget. I mean, that's that's just ridiculous. But what are really the results we got out of it? I mentioned recidivism being the best measure, so let's take a look at that. A study done by the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2005, tracking over 400,000 released prisoners, found that within 5 years of the release, over 76% of them had been rearrested. I mean, that is just dismal compared to the rest of the world. And it's really caused us to question whether our tough prisons with their very harsh conditions are actually having the desired effect of deterring people from coming back, like is the popular opinion. That's what most people would think would happen. But in fact, a study done by the same bureau, the BJS, shows that people who are in higher levels of security are actually more likely to come back to prison. And that was almost mind-blowing to me, because you would think the opposite. You would think the worse you've had it there, the less you would want to come back. But what I really think is that people who are in these high security conditions aren't properly taught how to re-enter society, and this is the only life they know. So that's part of the reason. So now we've seen what's wrong with it, I'd like to discuss some solutions. And two countries I would like to focus on are Norway and Sweden. So both of these countries have focused more on rehabilitating their prisoners rather than just punishing them and isolating them, which is the route we seem to have gone. And first I would like to show just how different the conditions are within the prison, especially the cell. So here we have two different prison cells, one in Norway and one in Colorado. You can see the one in Norway really almost looks like a college dorm. I mean, you have the basic necessities all there. There's a standard bed. There's natural light. It's not particularly dark or imposing. But in the one in Colorado, you can see there's a concrete slab for a bed. You do get a bedroll, but that's about it. It's not very comfortable, I've been told. There's a 4-inch wide window, so you get very little natural light. There's stone floors, stone walls. It's really just not great there. I mean, the people who are forced to spend almost 23 hours a day in these cells really just grow to hate it, but they can't get out of it, so they detest it. They detest the conditions they're in. But aside from just the cells conditions, there's a lot of different features that the foreign prisons have that we don't. This would include things like a gymnasium, things like a rec room, prayer space. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There's more natural light. There's plants. There's real utensils. There's less isolating security measures. And the philosophy behind these changes are quite simple. That if we allow people, even dangerous people, to feel like humans, and they'll behave more civilly than treated like forces of evil. So the differences I've shown should not really be viewed as being tough on crime versus being soft on crime, but rather treating people as prisoners with psychological needs that can be reformed to re-enter society in a productive capacity, rather than just being isolated and punished. I mean, staying at the prison itself is a punishment. Do we really need the added punishment of it almost being dungeon-like? I mean, I don't think so. But I would like you to think about if, after spending years or even decades in these cramped cells, up to 23 hours a day, without basic comforts, without human contact, is it more likely that the prisoner will be able to integrate to normal society, or they will grow to resent the system that put them there? I think the second option is more likely, but that's what I'm here to prove. So, let's move on to talking about how these reforms would affect the larger society if implemented. So, of course, they would require some initial investment to redesign the interior prisons, as well as to fund more education and training programs, such as the one I mentioned. I mean, there's other things they have, like a music recording studio, so prisoners can actually build skills while they're there instead of just wasting away. But this outlay of funds would soon pay off, however, as recidivism rates can be expected to drop, like we've seen in foreign countries. I don't know if I mentioned it, but Sweden has a 40% recidivism rate compared to our 76% recidivism rate, and 1 in 2,000 people in prison, so a much lower crime rate. So I think the methods really speak for themselves in terms of results. And we would also do away with the excessive security measures, which are mostly just designed to isolate the prisoners, rather than offer some form of internal security within the prison. Because as we've seen, gang violence is still quite rampant within American prisons. So, I mean, these security measures are not only the most dehumanizing, but also the most costly. Most supermax prisons estimate their yearly cost per prisoner to be around $62,000. I mean, that's more than a college education at most private universities. So, after the reforms have had time to take effect, we can expect to see a drop in recidivism rate, yearly spending on prisons, and overall crime rate. I'd like to imagine a world where we spend less on incarceration and are safer for it, based on the philosophy behind it, will be how we treat the prisoners within there. I mean, that's really a world I would like for myself and my children. So I've given you quite a lot of information to digest today. The main points, however, I hope you take away are that we should not accept a system that is costing us a staggering amount of money, producing such dismal results. There are, however, viable alternatives. What the more effective ones have in common is they focus on rehabilitation and re-education. So, in conclusion, this is not really a problem we can continue to ignore. I mean, I've shown you the trend in spending, recidivism rates, crime rates. We may not face it day to day, but the problem is only expanding, and if left unchecked, it will only get worse. So now that you all have seen how much is at stake, I hope you will not be satisfied with the current system. I'd like to call upon each of you to do whatever you can to make this issue heard. Whether that be writing a letter to representatives, participating in civil protest, or showing your support for the Reform Alliance, an organization recently founded by Jay-Z and Meek Mill, the aim to reform prison systems. Thank you for your attention.